The morning sun cast shadows across Fort Carson as Staff Sergeant Nina Castillo picked up brass casings with her metal bucket. 3 months ago, she'd made a 2,900-meter shot that saved her entire unit. Now, shrapnel in her left shoulder had reduced her to range cleanup. Then a British major arrived, mocked her in front of 18 witnesses, and challenged her to an impossible 3,400-meter shot. What happened next would expose a decade-old conspiracy that had murdered her father and turned elite snipers into assassins for hire. Staff Sergeant Nina Castillo walked the firing line at Fort Carson, Colorado, her metal bucket clanking softly as she collected brass casings. The shrapnel wound in her left shoulder ached with each bend, a permanent reminder of the RPG blast in Afghanistan that had ended her combat career. 3 months of this, picking up other soldiers' spent shells while her skills rusted away. The pain flared as she reached for a casing half buried in dirt. Her mind flashed back to that day on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. The mission was classified, the target high value, and the shot nearly impossible. She made it anyway. Then everything went sideways during extraction. That's when the RPG hit, sending shrapnel tearing through the open door and into her shoulder. Castillo. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb called out from across the range. Make sure you get all those casings. We've got VIPs coming in today for a demonstration. Nina nodded, keeping her voice neutral. Yes, Sergeant. Webb was a hard man, an Iraq veteran who saw her as nothing but a burden, just another broken soldier the Army didn't know what to do with. Before we continue, please comment below where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe to the She Force Tales channel. As she worked, Nina noticed the targets set at various distances. What caught her eye was a single target, barely visible even to her trained gaze, set at what looked like an extreme distance. That's got to be over 3,000 meters, she whispered to herself. Her own longest confirmed kill had been at 2,900 meters in the mountains of Afghanistan. That shot had made her a legend in certain circles, though few knew it was her behind the scope. The bucket was getting heavy when she heard vehicles approaching. A convoy of Humvees pulled up to the range, dust clouds trailing behind them. Out stepped a group of officers, both American and foreign. Among them was a tall man with sharp blue eyes and a perfectly groomed beard. Major Sebastian Blackwood, one of Britain's most famous military snipers and a member of the elite Special Air Service. Gentlemen, announced Colonel Morrison, the base commander, welcome to Fort Carson. Today we'll demonstrate why American soldiers are among the finest marksmen in the world. Impressive setup you have here, Colonel, Blackwood said in his crisp British accent. Though I notice you have a target set quite far out. That one must be what? 3,400 meters. Actually, it's exactly 3,400 meters, Morrison replied proudly. We use it for special training exercises. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. Extraordinary. I don't suppose any of your men have actually hit it? There was an uncomfortable pause. Well, it's more of a theoretical exercise, the colonel admitted. I see, Blackwood said with a slight smile that Nina didn't like. In Her Majesty's service, we prefer practical demonstrations to theoretical exercises. The demonstration began with basic marksmanship at shorter ranges. The American soldiers performed well, but Blackwood was barely paying attention. His eyes kept drifting to that distant target. When it came time for long-range shooting, the results were more mixed. At 800 meters, only half the shots hit the target. At 1,200 meters, the success rate dropped further. Respectable, commented Blackwood, though his tone suggested otherwise. Colonel Morrison's face reddened slightly. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate, Major? I thought you'd never ask. Blackwood stepped up to the firing line and was handed an M24 sniper rifle. He lined up on the 1,200-meter target first. The shot echoed across the range. Center mass, called out the spotter. Without hesitation, Blackwood adjusted and aimed at the 1,800-meter target. Another shot, another hit. But Blackwood wasn't finished. He stood up and looked out at the distant target at 3,400 meters. That target, he said casually. Has anyone ever attempted a shot at that distance? It's extremely difficult, Colonel Morrison stammered. The wind conditions alone make it nearly impossible. I see. Blackwood handed the rifle back. Perhaps it's best left as a theoretical exercise after all. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Of course, Blackwood continued, In Afghanistan, I made a confirmed kill at 3,100 meters. But I suppose conditions here in Colorado are more challenging. That was enough for Nina. She set down her bucket and walked toward the firing line. She could feel eyes turning toward her, confusion on the faces of the officers. "Excuse me, sir," she said, addressing Colonel Morrison. Her voice was steady, respectful, but there was steel underneath. "Castillo, what are you doing?" hissed Sergeant Webb. "Get back to work." But Colonel Morrison held up a hand. He knew Nina's record, even if he'd forgotten it in the moment. "What is it, Staff Sergeant?" "I'd like to attempt a shot, sir." At 3,400 meters. The silence that followed was deafening. Major Blackwood turned to look at her for the first time. "I'm sorry," he said with barely concealed amusement. "Did the cleaning lady just volunteer for precision shooting?" Several of the British soldiers chuckled. Nina felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "Staff Sergeant Nina Castillo, sir. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Sniper qualified. Personal best confirmed kill at 2,900 meters. The chuckling stopped. Blackwood's expression shifted slightly, though the condescension remained. "I see. And you think you can hit a target at 3,400 meters? With equipment you haven't zeroed? In conditions you haven't studied? After spending the morning collecting brass like a common laborer?" "I like to try, sir." Colonel Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Major Blackwood, if you have no objections." Blackwood smiled coldly. "None at all, Colonel. Though perhaps we should make this interesting. If the staff sergeant misses, she continues her custodial duties without complaint. But if, by some miracle, she hits the target..." He paused. "Well, I suppose I owe her an apology." "And if she hits center mass?" asked Colonel Morrison, surprising everyone. Blackwood's smile widened. "Then I'll personally recommend her for the Queen's Medal for marksmanship. Though I assure you, gentlemen, that won't be necessary." Nina nodded once. "I accept those terms, sir." As the officers stepped back, an elderly man approached from the side of the range. Master Sergeant James Old Ghost Sullivan, the base's senior sniper instructor. At 70, with thinning white hair, Sullivan was a relic from another era, a veteran of Vietnam and Desert Storm and countless classified operations. "Castillo," he said quietly, using her last name despite protocol. "You sure about this?" She was surprised he knew who she was. "Yes, Master Sergeant." Sullivan studied her face. "You remind me of your father." Same determination in the eyes. Nina froze. "You knew my father?" "Diego Castillo and I served together in SEAL Team 4 during Desert Storm. He was the best shooter I ever saw. Until now, perhaps." Sullivan glanced at the distant target. "I've been watching your career from a distance. Your old man would be proud." Before Nina could process this, Sullivan leaned closer. "This is the opportunity you've been waiting for. Show them what a Castillo can do." He stepped back, leaving Nina with 1,000 questions. How did Sullivan know her father? Why had he never approached her? As she walked toward the firing line, her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She picked up the M24 rifle that Blackwood had been using. The scope was good, but not great. The rifle itself was standard issue, not customized for extreme long-range work. "Problem, Staff Sergeant?" asked Blackwood. "No, sir," Nina replied. "Just getting familiar with the weapon." The distance was enormous, nearly 500 meters beyond her longest confirmed kill. The wind was variable, gusting from different directions at different elevations. The target was small, probably no more than 18 inches across, and she was using an unfamiliar rifle with a scope she'd never zeroed. The odds were heavily against her, which was exactly how she liked it. Nina knelt behind the firing line, the M24 rifle resting on its bipod. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the range fade away. When she opened her eyes, the world had narrowed to just her, the rifle, and that distant speck on the mountainside. She began her preparations methodically. First, she studied the wind. She could see grass and small bushes at various distances, watching how they moved. The wind near the firing line was coming from the southwest at maybe 8 miles per hour, but at longer distances, she could see it was shifting, coming more from the west and picking up speed. "Poor girl doesn't know what she's gotten herself into," she heard one of the British soldiers whisper. "Whenever you're ready, Staff Sergeant," Blackwood said. "We don't have all day." Nina ignored him. She was calculating bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric conditions. The 7.62 mm NATO round would drop nearly 420 feet over that distance. You know, said Blackwood loud enough for everyone to hear. In my experience, the most dangerous thing on a battlefield isn't the enemy. It's an overconfident soldier who doesn't know their limitations. Nina's jaw tightened, but she continued her preparations. As she worked, memories flooded back. Afghanistan, 2021. Providing overwatch for a convoy when Taliban fighters had set up an ambush. Her spotter had called out a target at extreme range. One shot. If she missed, her unit would be sitting ducks. Sending it, she'd replied. The shot had been perfect, striking the enemy sniper at 2,900 meters. Another memory surfaced. Her childhood in Texas, her father teaching her to shoot when she was just 11. The rifle is just a tool, Mija, he'd said. The real weapon is the person behind it. Their focus, their discipline, their heart. Diego Castillo had been a SEAL sniper during Desert Storm. He'd passed on his knowledge through practice every weekend. By 15, she could outshoot most grown men. When she joined the Army, he'd given her a notebook filled with handwritten notes. My sniper journal. Things they don't teach in the manuals. Staff Sergeant Castillo, are you ready? Colonel Morrison asked. Nina settled into position behind the rifle. Through the scope, the target was barely visible, a faint rectangular shape against the hillside. She could see heat shimmer rising from the ground, adding another variable. One shot, asked Blackwood. Or would you prefer a few practice rounds? One shot, Nina replied without looking up. Confident. I respect that, even if it's misplaced. Nina controlled her breathing, taking slow, deep breaths. Her heart rate slowed. Everything except her, the rifle, and the target ceased to exist. She began to apply pressure to the trigger, gradually increasing the force. At this distance, even the slightest jerk would send the bullet far from its target. Winds picking up, observed one of the spotters. Nina had noticed it too. She made a tiny adjustment to her point of aim. Anytime now, Staff Sergeant, said Blackwood. Though I suppose there's no shame in admitting this is beyond your capabilities. The comment was designed to rattle her. Nina had encountered this kind of psychological warfare before, from enemies and from fellow soldiers who couldn't accept a woman might be their equal. Instead of responding, she began her final breathing cycle. Deep breath in, let half of it out. Hold. In that moment of perfect stillness, she applied the final pressure to the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The sound echoed off the mountains like thunder. Through the scope, she watched the target. At this distance, it would take nearly 4 seconds for the bullet to reach. For seconds felt like an eternity. Behind her, she could hear the spotters adjusting their telescopes. I don't see an impact, called out one of the spotters. Check the target, ordered Colonel Morrison. There was a long pause as the spotter examined the distant target carefully. I think I see something, he said uncertainly. It's hard to tell at this distance. What do you mean you think you see something? Demanded Blackwood. Either there's a hit or there isn't. There appears to be a mark on the target, sir, but I can't tell if it's a bullet hole or just a shadow. Nina finally lifted her head from a scope. She felt the shot was good, but at this distance, even a perfect shot could be thrown off by factors she couldn't control. We'll need to drive out and check the target, said Colonel Morrison. The drive to the target took 20 minutes across rough terrain. Nina sat in the back, her hands folded in her lap. If she'd missed, she'd be the laughingstock of the base. As they approached, she could see it was a standard military silhouette target, about 18 inches wide and 30 inches tall. Major Blackwood was in the lead, clearly expecting to prove his point about American overconfidence. As they got closer, Nina could see a fresh hole in the target. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to stay calm. They were now close enough to see the target clearly. There, just left the center mass, was a clean bullet hole. Well, I'll be damned, whispered one of the American officers. Major Blackwood examined the hole closely. Impressive, he said finally, though his tone suggested he was anything but impressed. A hit at that range is certainly noteworthy. Of course, it's not center mass. Actually, sir, interrupted the spotter, given the wind conditions and the distance, the shot is almost exactly where it should be for a perfect center mass aim point. The bullet drift puts it just slightly left, which is exactly what you'd expect with the crosswind we had. Nina allowed herself a small smile. The spotter was right. She hadn't been aiming for the left side of the target. She'd aimed for dead center and let physics do the rest. Major Blackwood's expression darkened. I see. Well, as I said, a noteworthy shot. Of course, anyone can get lucky. Lucky! Nina spoke for the first time since taking the shot. Sir, with respect, luck doesn't account for wind calculation, bullet draw compensation, and atmospheric condition. I was wounded in action, sir. Took shrapnel on my left shoulder. The Army Medical Board determined I was no longer fit for combat duties. I see. And they assigned you to custodial work. Someone has to do it, sir. Indeed. Blackwood smiled coldly. Though I have to wonder if the American military is making the best use of its resources. In the British Army, we find ways to utilize experienced soldiers even when they can't serve on the front lines. As they drove back to the main base, Nina stared out the window at the Colorado mountains. She'd made the shot, proved her point, earned a grudging acknowledgement from the British major. But nothing had really changed. Tomorrow, she'd be back on the range with her bucket, collecting other people's shell casings. Unless something else changed first. The story of Nina's shot spread through Fort Carson like wildfire. By evening chow, half the base had heard some version of the tale, most wildly exaggerated, but the basic facts were impressive enough. A wounded soldier assigned to range cleanup had outshot a famous British sniper at an impossible distance. Nina tried to eat her dinner in peace, but soldiers kept approaching her table to congratulate her. Castillo, called out Sergeant Webb as he approached with his tray. Mind if I sit? Nina gestured to the empty chair across from her. Webb had been her supervisor since she'd been assigned to range maintenance, and their relationship had been strictly professional. Hell of a shot today, he said as he sat down. I mean, hell of a shot. I've been in the Army 16 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Thank you, Sergeant. Webb studied her face. You know, I owe you an apology. When they assigned you to my detail, I figured you were just another broken soldier they didn't know what to do with. I was wrong. I appreciate that, Sergeant. Question is, what happens now? You can't go back to just picking up brass after what you did today. Before Nina could respond, the dining hall fell unusually quiet. She looked up to see Major Blackwood entering with several other British officers. Speak of the devil, muttered Webb. That British major has been asking questions about you all afternoon. Wanted to know your complete service record, your medical status, everything. As if summoned by their conversation, Major Blackwood walked over to their table. Staff Sergeant Castillo, might I have a word? Nina followed him to a quieter corner of the dining hall. Up close, she could see that his earlier condescension had been replaced by something else. Calculation, perhaps. That was quite a performance today, he began. It wasn't a performance, sir. It was just shooting. Just shooting. He smiled slightly. Do you know what the longest confirmed kill in military history is, Staff Sergeant? I believe it's held by a Canadian JTF-2 sniper, sir. 3,650 meters in Iraq. Correct. And your shot today, hitting a target at 3,400 meters. That's extraordinary by any standard. Nina waited. She sensed this conversation was leading somewhere. I've been speaking with your Colonel Morrison about your situation. It seems the American military has a talent for mismanaging its human resources. I serve where I'm assigned, sir. Of course. Very admirable. But I have a proposition for you. Blackwood leaned in slightly. The British Army is hosting an international sniper competition next month at our training facility in Scotland. Teams from 14 countries. The best military marksmen in the world. Nina's pulse quickened. She'd heard of such competitions, but had never imagined participating. The thing is, Blackwood continued, I have some influence over the selection process, and after today's demonstration, I believe you might be exactly what the competition needs. I'm not sure I understand, sir. What I'm suggesting, Staff Sergeant, is that you represent the United States in this competition. Show the world what American marksmanship is really capable of. For a moment, Nina was speechless, but then reality crashed back in. Sir, I'm not sure that's possible. My medical status, my current assignment. Details, Blackwood said dismissively. I've already spoken to Colonel Morrison. He's willing to recommend you for temporary duty if I make the formal request. Nina's mind raced. This could be her chance back to what she did best. But something in Blackwood's manner made her cautious. Why would you do this, sir? After what happened today? Blackwood's smile was enigmatic. Let's just say I believe in giving people the opportunity to prove themselves. Besides, it will be interesting to see how you perform under real pressure with the best shooters in the world watching. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a test. I need time to think about it, sir. Of course, but not too much time. I'll need an answer by tomorrow evening. As Blackwood walked away, Webb leaned over. What was that about? Nina explained the offer, watching Webb's expression shift from excitement to concern. Castillo, that sounds incredible, but are you sure about this guy's motives? After the way he acted today, I'm not sure about anything, Sergeant. But when was the last time someone offered me a chance to do what I was trained for? That night, Nina lay awake in her barracks room. The smart thing would be to decline Blackwood's offer. She had a comfortable, if unrewarding, assignment. Her shoulder was healing well, and in a few months, she might be able to request reassignment to a training role. But the shot today had reminded her of who she really was. Not a custodian or a broken soldier, but one of the finest marksmen the Army had ever produced. She thought about her father, who had recognized her natural talent early. Mija, he used to say, shooting isn't about the gun or the target. It's about knowing yourself, trusting your training, and never backing down from challenge. By morning, her decision was made. She found Master Sergeant Sullivan at the sniper training facility, working with a group of young marksmen. When he saw her approach, he dismissed his students. Staff Sergeant Castillo, he said formally, "What can I do for you?" "I'd like to speak with you in private, Master Sergeant." He nodded, leading her to a small office. Once the door closed, his demeanor changed. "You've been looking at your father's journal," he said before she could speak. "Found my name, I imagine." Nina was taken aback. "How did you know?" "You have the same look he did when he was working through a problem. I've been expecting you. Figured you'd have questions after yesterday." "More than a few." Nina tried to keep her voice steady. "You knew my father, served with him, and you've been here at Fort Carson all this time. Why didn't you ever approach me before?" Sullivan sank into a chair. Not a simple answer to that one. Part of it was respecting boundaries. Diego and I had a complicated history. We were close during Desert Storm, shared a sniper hide for 35 days in the Iraqi desert. That kind of experience forges bonds. But afterward, he trailed off. What happened? Difference of opinion. Professional at first, then personal. We went our separate ways. I kept tabs on him. Knew when he had a daughter. Knew when you joined the Army. When I heard you'd been assigned here after your injury, I requested a transfer to this base. You transferred here because of me? Sullivan nodded. I owe Diego that much, to look out for his daughter, even if from a distance. I've been watching your progress, reading the reports. You're better than he was, you know, and he was the best I'd ever seen. A lump formed in Nina's throat. The idea that her father would be proud of her meant more than she could express. Blackwood's offered me a place in the international competition next month. Sullivan's expression darkened. I heard. Be careful with that one, Nina. Sebastian Blackwood has a reputation for using people to serve his own ends. He doesn't make offers out of generosity.